Thank you for the invitation, and we just want to share some things with you. This is an area that is coming up with quite a number of breakthroughs as it relates to science, and we hope that whatever we share today, that we can take that away and apply it. That's the whole point of us actually sharing in the first place. Can we pray? Our hearts, please. Heavenly Father, we are so grateful that you have spared our lives. You have brought us here together once more on your holy Sabbath day. We ask now, dear God, that your Spirit be among us, that you will lead, and that, dear God, we will follow. We ask whatever we share, that, dear God, you will enlighten our minds. And we pray, dear God, that we will have the strength and the obedience, dear God, to apply in our own lives. As I humbly ask your leading and direction now, that you may increase and I decrease, is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so the MindGut Connection is a fascinating new area that we're having quite a number of breakthroughs. And we're going to be sharing that with you today. So that's the human brain that we see there. Anybody knows how much the human brain weighs? Any ideas? Huh? 2 kgs? Yes. It's mainly made of water, that's true, right? Yeah, about 3 pounds, probably roughly about 2-point-something kgs, yeah? And it actually comprises of about 60% fat. So we actually need to eat fat in order to help our brains as well. But the good fat, right? And we'll share some of those. The human brain has a capacity to generate approximately 23 watts of power when awake. So that can run quite a bit. Of the total blood and oxygen in our bodies, actually 20% of it is used up by our brains. Right? So it does need a lot of replenishing so that it can actually function properly. Right? So if we're not eating properly, if we're not doing the things that are going to help it to do that, then chances are it's not going to function the way that we want it to. When the blood supply to the brain stops, it takes almost 8 to 10 seconds that the brain starts losing consciousness. The brain is capable of surviving for 5 to 6 minutes only if it doesn't get oxygen. All right, so, and again, oxygen is very important for the brain. The blood vessels that are present in the brain are almost 100,000 miles in length. And they are, of course, the estimates vary from one place to the next. So they say that over 100 billion neurons, right? Not to mention connections from the neurons in the different synapses as well. In early pregnancy, the neurons develop at an alarming rate of 25,000 per minute. So the growing child naturally needs that in order to get to where it needs to be. Now, the brain, of course, differs, right? And from one animal to the next. If you see in your mice, your rats, it's the frontal lobe, right, is about 3%, 3.5 in your cats, and about 17% in your chimpanzees. And of course, in humans, it's roughly between 33 and 37% in your humans. So this frontal lobe is really what makes us different from the animals, all right? So that's what gives us. So what's the purpose of the frontal lobe? It's considered the emotional center and the home of our personality. Things like reasoning and language, long-term memory, problem solving, emotions, right? All of those things are actually centered in our frontal lobe. Yeah? So look a little bit more on that. So as the name suggests, it's the front part of our brain, right? So frontal cortex and the frontal lobe. The largest lobe of the brain. And this is actually coming from secular scientists. It says that it is the seat of judgment, deciphering between right and wrong, perception, reasoning, intellect, worrying, analysis, the will, and all the powers of the mind. It's actually referred to as the citadel or the crown of the brain, right? And because of the functions naturally. So as we said, both religious and secular scientists are coming to the same point of view about the frontal lobe and its importance. Now, what we're going to look at today really has to do with what we call neuroscience. And neuroscience is a growing area, right, where we're now finding out that the brain, which was once thought to be fixed a little bit after birth, right, we now realize that can actually change. So with each experience, each thought, our brains are actually changing. So today, your brain will be changing in a way that you wouldn't have imagined because you're going to be consuming new information. So the brain will actually change in order to accommodate that as well. Now, modern neuroscience finds itself in the experience of a gentleman named Phineas Gage. Anybody have heard of him? Phineas Gage? Okay. So Phineas Gage was a gentleman that worked on the railroad in the US. And he was considered hardworking, pretty reliable, right? Good humor, intelligent, a God-fearing family man, right? However, there was a freak accident that happened to Phineas Gage. They used what we call a tamping rod. So what they used to do is bore holes, and then they put the dynamite inside there. And then they will actually press it down with these tamping rods. So what happens is usually you put a bit of dirt inside there as well in order to cover the dynamite, right? So you would not have direct contact with the steel that is going in and the dynamite itself. On this particular day, nobody knew what happened, but the dynamite hit, and the tamping rod that Phineas Gage was using actually ignited with the dynamite and blew the tamping rod right through his face. If you see that it entered there, I think it actually hit out one of his eyes, went through the parts of the frontal lobe of the brain. What is surprising is that Phineas Gage actually lived, and he lived probably about 12 or more years afterwards. But they started noticing some difference with Phineas Gage. The story is actually told that he actually drove himself to the doctor after that accident, right? Basically kind of scraping up some parts of his brain and taking it with him, right, at that point in time. So he was a very strong man. But there certain changes started happening in Phineas Gage. So he became pretty unreliable after a while, right? So he started missing work. His interest in going to church, he was actually a God-fearing man. He stopped doing that as well, right? He started drinking alcohol. He started actually prostitution, right? And they say actually sexually molesting children as well, right? Of course, that would lead to his entire family life breaking apart and his working life as well. They say he didn't have his sense of humor anymore. He curses constantly. And of course, died sometime of epilepsy in 1861. Now, because of the time that Phineas Gage lived, it means that there was enough time to kind of gather information on this gentleman and to some of the reasons why. What happened to him actually happened. And we're finding out now that it is that frontal lobe that was really damaged that actually led to some of his actually behaviors that Phineas Gage experienced at that point in time. So he was actually a victim, right? And I suppose in that sense, many of us are. So what are some of the common effects of a compromised frontal lobe? And
I have a list here. So our moral principles are impaired. Social impairment, so loss of love for family, lack of foresight, lack of spirituality, reasoning ability, critical analysis. And you might be going down that list, and I said that actually describes my teenager. If you have any, if you know any, because I've seen quite a bit of this among our teens, and there are a number of reasons why that is actually happening. Part of it is also the media that is being there, but the frontal lobe is not quite developed at that age either. Oftentimes, I say probably not until about 25 and 30, right? Stress and irritability, right? Lack of restraint, anxiety, and depression. So are all common effects, right, of the frontal lobe. I came across this, it's a Christian writer. He said, it behooves every one of us to keep our brain healthy and avoid, like the plague, those things which have a deleterious effect on the frontal lobe. Those things which we have control over. We want our frontal lobe to be as healthy and pure as possible, for it is the place where all the higher powers of the mind, things like perception, reasoning, judgment, deciphering between right and wrong takes place. The place where God communicates with us. That's powerful, right? And where the mind and the image of Christ could be created in us forever and ever. Now, we're a church that believes the whole idea of course, the hope of glory is God replicated in us, right? And if our frontal lobe, for any reason, is compromised, right, then this is naturally going to lead to problems. One, with us actually hearing God, right? Hearing what he wants for us. And of course, that would lead to complications, us actually applying some of those precepts to our own lives. Now, what I want to talk about is the interconnectivity of the human body system. Now, everything is connected to each other, right? I think in the past we have quite a bit of what we call Greek philosophy, that actually makes a separation between mind, body, and soul, and all of those different things, right? But we know that everything, that is connected, forming a very delicate whole, right? And of course, anything that is not working as it should, right, then it is going to ultimately affect other areas of our bodies, right? So we talk about the mind-body connection, right? The mind is inextricably linked to the body, right? And this is what Sister White says in Ministry of Healing, page 241. The relationship that exists between the mind and the body is very intimate. When one is affected, the other sympathizes. Right? So one area is affected, the other naturally has some sympathy for it, right? And we're going to look a bit at some of those later, right? We are not new to this because we have heard about the placebo effect, which many times they say that many of even the drugs that we currently use are actually placebos, when they were being used in order to bring about these drugs in themselves, right? So if you believe something, oftentimes then it actually works for you, and that goes for what you don't actually believe as well, right? I like this one. Says these capsules are fabulous. When I look at the box, I stop coughing, right? If it was only like that for many cases. But let's explore this mind-body connection a little bit more. What factors affect this mind-body connection, right? And you can kind of fasten your seatbelts because you're going to have a few information. I don't know if you have little papers, can jot down stuff here because I'm going to try and go a little quickly because I don't want to keep you too long here as well. But if you can take little notes, then that would be good, that you can go away and actually do your own research as well, right? Because I just don't want you to take my word for it either, right? So the gut-brain connection is what we're going to be looking at, all right? Sister White said this in Ministry of Healing again. The stomach is closely related to the brain. And when the stomach is diseased, the nerve power is called from the brain to the aid of the weakened digestive organs. When these demands are too frequent, the brain becomes congested, right? Now we're talking about the brain again, and in particular, we're talking about the frontal lobe, right? So that's really what we're looking at. Now we're going to come back to some of these things as to ways that we can actually avoid some of that. So the optimum digestion, absorption, and assimilation of food is this what we call this brain-gut connection. How does the brain-gut connect? It connects in three ways. It connects through what we call the vagus nerve, the enteric nervous system, or ENS, and the gut-brain axis, right? And so what is the vagus nerve? This is the longest cranial nerve and has a direct connection between the gut and the brain. So I don't know how many of us actually know that we have a direct connection from the brain in our cranial nerves to the gut in the body, right? So next, it's connected through what we call the enteric nervous system. And many scientists are now referring to this as almost like a second brain, right? Its main role is to control digestion from swallowing to the release of enzymes that break down food to control of blood flow that helps with nutrient absorption to elimination, right? And also, it doesn't seem capable of thought as we know it, but it communicates back and forth with our big brain with profound results. So that's the enteric nervous system, right? So one, it was the vagus nerve. Two is the enteric nervous system. Next is the gut-brain axis, right? The brain is the most nutrient-dependent, energy-dependent, and toxin and stress-vulnerable organ in the body. The gut and the brain are very tightly linked. The gut-brain axis, damage to one is often damage to the other. So what is that saying? If we have damage to our gut, right, our stomachs, our intestines, it means that we're going to have damage ultimately to our brains as well because they are inextricably linked, right? Now, here's the reason why. The gut is a huge chemical factory composed of a microbiome. So a microbiome really is an entire ecosystem. So we have an entire ecosystem actually living in our bodies, right? And that is amazing to me because probably about a few years ago, I didn't give this a lot of thought. So it produces vitamins and neurotransmitters, digests food, regulate hormones, excrete toxins, and keep gut health. The lion's share of the chemicals needed for proper brain function originate in our gut. So my brain's function is largely dependent on my gut, what I put into my body. That was powerful for me. I don't know how it resonates with you, right? But what I am actually eating can actually affect me in very profound ways in my brain. And I've seen this happen in my own life as well, all right? So let's look at that. So over 100 species of bacteria live in the gut. Over 1,000 species, right? 50 different phyla of bacteria, right? They collectively weigh about 3 pounds. So how much do we say the brain weighs? So in other words, the bacteria in my body weigh as much as my brain. Is that a good balance? Probably. Right? Humans have more bacteria than cells in our bodies. So we are more bacteria than actually cells. And we have billions of cells. This microbiome, or what we call gut flora, communicates from the gut to the brain. So bacteroids, bifidobacterium, fecal bacterium, ruminococcus. These are the names of some of the 100 trillion bacteria who are living and working in yours and my gut. We're talking about we are actually the hosts then of other organisms. All right? Why is that important? Right? We say that chemical factory. Just let's look at some of the neurotransmitters that we have in our bodies and the function that they perform. So serotonin, for example. Everybody probably would have heard of serotonin, right? That affects mood, sleep, appetite, impulsivity, aggression, right? Next, we have dopamine. Also, again, another feel-good one. Affects motivation, attention, learning, pleasure. Glutamate affects learning, thought, and emotion. Noradrenaline affects eating, alertness, wakefulness. Endorphins provide relief from pain and feelings of pleasure and well-being. Testosterone, affects anger, aggression, and violence. And cortisol affects fear, arousal, fight, and of course, a fight or flight response. Now, we're saying what we're actually finding out is that most of these are actually produced in the gut. This is alarming to me. The gut contains more neurotransmitters than the brain, right? And this one was actually shocking for me. Up to 90% of the serotonin needed for brain communication is produced in the gut. So, and it shouldn't be surprising. Why it shouldn't be surprising? When we eat certain things, we feel better. Person will tell you that I feel much better when I have chocolate. Yeah? And there's a reason for that. It has serotonin in it, but it also has caffeine in it, right? So it all depends. But we do feel better after eating certain types of meal, right? And so therefore, that is where the link is. Now, let's go a little deeper, right? So we want to look at what are some of the risk factors of issues within brain and gut. So of course, there's genetic and what we call epigenetic factors, and I'll break that down a little bit more for you. There's faulty metabolism, digestive issues, and of course, poor diet and lifestyle. Now, for your genetic and epigenetic, right? There are hormones and neurotransmitters, things like your medication, and of course, stress are major issues. Hormones naturally affect how we function as well as your neurotransmitters. I just mentioned serotonin. But another major effect can be the antibiotics that affect our gut microbiome. So in other words, many times the antibiotics that we do have or we do take will actually deplete our microbiome, the good bacteria that we actually have there, right? And those take a little while in order to replenish, and we actually have to be intentional about replenishing those for them to actually come back the way we are. So that actually ultimately opens up to us to quite a bit of illnesses as well. Stress is a major issue, right? And the stress I'm talking about here now is, yes, we stress about many things in our lives, but they're talking about that there is no an epigenetic link to stress. What that means is that many times we are actually born predisposed to being stressed. The what the mother feeds on actually affects the child, the unborn child. So if the mother is having a lot of food that is naturally going to be raising the blood sugar levels. Naturally, your white food, right? Your white rice, your white flour, all of those different things, right? Then naturally, she's going to be producing different things in our bodies that are going to be affecting the child, right? But also the environment that she lives in. If she is stressed, then she's going to be producing neurotransmitters and hormones that are going to flood her system, right? Which naturally the child will be affected by as well. The child is coming out to an environment that they're actually preparing for in utero. In order for me to survive in the environment that I'm going to be coming out, right, I need to be prepared in order to do so. And naturally, I become hypersensitive to stress, to worry, to anxiety, right? Because that now prepares me to deal with the environment that I'm coming into, all right? So there are a few things, right, that actually looks at that, all right? So the epigenetic, what they call modification of stress response, and of course we call the gut-brain axis. Stress can also induce changes in the gut microbiota and their products, which can further affect the brain, right? It is believed that the mother, if she eats a particular diet, right, say a diet high in junk food, and I'll show you a little bit of research that looks at that, right? Oftentimes the child will naturally be affected by the type of food that she eats as well, right? I'm going to come back to that a little later on. Digestive issues. So any of these things, like your GERD, your constipation, diarrhea, irritable bowel syndrome, gallstone disease, all of these can actually end up affecting our microbiome or our microbiota, right? Faulty metabolism, thyroid issues, diabetes, of course, Cushing's disease and other chronic diseases. And the 3 Ps, preserved, packaged, and processed food are among the major culprits for a depleted or compromised microbiota. So anything that is high in sugar, high in salt, right? We're talking about processed foods. Anything that comes in a tin or a box or anything like that. Unsaturated fats, animal protein, caffeine, energy drinks, coffee, tea, and of course, alcohol, artificial sweeteners. All of those things actually affect our microbiome. What is that saying to me? Right? Could the lifestyle and culture of the British be affecting our mental and physical health? Currently, I think the stat is showing that 1 in 4 adults have a mental health issue. Among our teen adolescents, it's now 1 in 3. So this is a major jump from where it was at some point in time. So what is the link between this? And I'm saying that there must be a link in terms of what we're doing, right? What we're eating, what we're doing, or what we're not doing in some cases, right? That is actually leading to this. And I'll just look at a couple of research for you. It says junk food risk kids, right? So we know that things like diabetes too is on the increase, right? But also, naturally, those type of food will also affect the microbiota, right? Those are not actually feeding it because they have very little fiber in them, all right? So does the pregnant mother's diet affect the unborn child? We're saying yes, right? Pregnant mothers who eat high sugar and high fat diets have babies who are likely to become junk food junkies themselves. According to the report, which used, right, they said that it's used rat. This happens because the high fat and high sugar diet leads to changes in the fetal brain's reward pathway, altering food preferences. In other words, a number of the teens that I see at school will tell you that, sir, it tastes good. I'm just saying that some of that taste actually was actually, they were actually born with. It's in utero, right? That was passed on from the mother to the child. All right, couple of researches that I picked up on. So gut-brain microbiota axis may play a role in depression and anxiety. Now we go back to talking about things like serotonin and dopamine. So if we are not having the microbiota that is going to support and make those serotonin, then we'll have to get it externally. And you can't get that, an exhaustive resource externally, because the body is designed to actually make that. Right? So this is just a few of the research that is there. And I'll, in the interest of time, I'll try not to go through too much. I can actually share this with you as well, by the way. Looks at diet and violence. Does diet affect our criminal behavior? Junk food in pregnancy linked to a child with mental disorders. As a matter of fact, at this point in time, they're saying a lot of the disorders that we have, things like autism, what they're now referring to as neurodevelopmental, they believe has some kind of genesis in what we eat, our lifestyle. Stressful pregnancy matters. It can affect a baby's genes. They say stress actually alters the gene in a particular way. And I mentioned earlier, altering the neurotransmitters in the body as well. Depression and poor diet during pregnancy can affect a child's cognitive function. And I think that's not too far a stretch. We should know that if we don't eat properly, then it's naturally going to affect the child. Gut, brain, and autism, anxiety, Alzheimer's, depression, and schizophrenia, right, are now considered issues with our gut, right? Just some quick symptoms of the brain-gut imbalance. Right. Loss of memory and concentration. And the exception of as we get older, we do actually suffer some memory loss. Right? But the fact of the matter is that we now know that we can actually, we do not actually have to suffer from memory loss. Brain fog, what we call it, or lack of focus, irritability, aggression, constipation issues, sleep issues, insomnia, fatigue, appetite loss or too much appetite in some cases. Right? So all of these are things that are actually contributing to our symptoms. So inspired problems. So what are some of the inspired solutions that we have for that? Right? And I'm going to try and go through this. So NEWS is an acronym, right? And of course the N is for nutrition. So based on the research that I am seeing, right? So this is not my point of view now. Plant foods are rich in compounds and nutrients that lower stress and improve mental function and mood, right? So you're eating your fresh vegetables, eating your fresh fruits, your whole grains, your beans, your legumes, your nuts and seeds. Avoiding, of course, I think Sister White mentions, they call that abstemiousness. So in other words, you avoid the things that are bad for you and actually try to get more of the things that are good for you, right? Saturated animal fat and trans fat, sugary drinks, caffeine, and large amounts of refined sugar. It was interesting. I saw a video recently, and they said that, was it in the 1960s? They said that we used to consume probably just about a bag of sugar, I think probably for a year, right? I think that has now moved to this, like about 40 bags, like an entire cupboard full of sugar. And that probably is just for a month in terms of, because everything, to some extent these days, have in some amount of sugar and salt as well. So 8 worst foods for your brain, right? Sugary drinks include beverages like soda and fruit drinks, right? Refined carbs, right? Yeah, so your high processed grains such as white flour, rice, pasta, foods high in trans and saturated fats, highly processed foods, your artificial sweeteners, alcohol, and of course the recent research saying that there's no safe amount of alcohol. Fish, even, high in mercury levels and seem to be increasing these days. And of course, caffeine in your sports drinks, energy drinks, coffee, tea, and even your chocolate. All right? Sister White has this to say, erroneous eating and drinking results in erroneous thinking and acting. What we eat affects our thoughts and ultimately the outworkings in our behaviors. Right? Remedies, 5 ways to start improving your gut health today. Right? So poor diet, alcohol, and stress can impact your gut. Eat more vegetables, focus on fiber. Eat more pre- and probiotic-rich foods. Drink wisely, and of course we're talking more of water and reduce junk food intake. Right? So this was a research that was done, and I won't spend too long with that in terms of, it's not just what we eat, it's also how we eat. Right? How often we eat is a major issue. Our diabetics will tell you that the doctor says you need to eat small amounts, in very short order. But that is actually wreaking havoc on our guts, right? Because the fact of the matter is that we do not give our food enough time to digest. By right, we should be eating anywhere between 4 and 5 hours. We should be allowing anywhere between 4 and 5 hours, and sometimes more depending on the meal we have, for digestion to take place. Right? Sister Wise highly recommends eating twice a day, which actually will give us the time in order for those food to process through our bodies. And basically, this research is just showing us what happens if we eat before the food is actually digested. The system is so designed in order to ensure that it maintains itself, right? So what happens is that if we just had something to eat, or we just had lunch, right? And you eat in the next hour or so, all right? The system will stop processing whatever is there that you just had for lunch and start processing the thing that is new coming in. So in other words, whatever is there will actually remain there for quite a long time. And if things remain in your stomach for a long time, what happens to it in your system? It putrefies, right? In other words, it rots. And so that is really what will happen. So if we do not give our system enough time for digestion, then that actually ultimately happens. Going quickly again. When the brain is constantly taxed and there is lack of exercise, even plain food should be eaten sparingly. And mealtime, cast off care and anxious thoughts, right? And the next one for the E is for getting moving with exercise, right? We now know that exercise is really not just for our body. Yes, it helps with circulation, but for the most part, the reason is because it makes our brain function at its best, right? The reason for that is that it actually, in exercise, there is what we call the BDNF is actually produced. Sorry. So BDNF is produced, which is like fertilizer for our brain, right? So in order for us to actually have some of those connections that we need in our brain for the neurons to function as they should, right? And the impulses carried, BDNF actually helps in that, right? Scientists now believe our brains are more like plastic, able to adapt, grow, and change depending on what we do with them, right? And of course, that gives me hope. It means that even into my 70s, 80s, and 90s, if God spares my life, I can actually still be fruitful and working for the Lord, right? Low levels of BDNF have been associated with depression, anxiety, poor memory, and brain degeneration, as seen in conditions such as Alzheimer's and dementia. So get moving, right? At least 3 times per week. Of course, we know that sedentary lifestyles actually have serious effects on us. More of us are working in offices where we sit for extended periods of time, and that is not actually helping us. Exercise can actually affect the structure of the brain by triggering the creation of new brain cells. We've mentioned that. But being sedentary increases the risk of heart disease, diabetes, various other chronic disorders. But of course, right, that naturally will affect what is our gut-brain connection. Water is life, right? And I often say that we do live in a very constipated society. We do not drink enough water, all right? We often substitute them for coffee and tea and other things, right? Brain is roughly about 70% of our bodies are water, roughly about 75 to 90% of our brain is water. So it just makes good sense that we're actually doing that, right? To maintain proper function, we require roughly about 2.5 liter to 3.5 liter a day, roughly a half of your body weight in ounces, right? So we want to look at trying to maintain that on a daily basis, and that can be a challenge. It's probably easier when the time is warm, but when it gets cool, we know that that can be a serious challenge. But the problem with that is that any even mild dehydration can cause problems with our fatigue and mood swings, right? So we need to be careful of that. So water is very important. And of course, that also helps to flush the system, right, to keep us healthy, all right? Sleep is another issue. Because sleep actually affects our moods, right? There are many persons who suffer from insomnia. And of course, many of that has roots also in the microbiota, what we eat, the fact that we're not getting exercise, we're not drinking enough water, right? And one of the issues is, as I said, fiber is a major issue in all of this, right? We need roughly about 70% fiber. I think they said that most of us probably take in less than 30%, right? To treat the brain, we must remove the cause of inflammation, such as leaky gut, and restore normal immune balance through food, nutrients, exercise, sleep, and stress management. Healing power of probiotics is going to be important for us as well. Their benefits to our bodies. Some examples of pre and probiotics is that kimchi. Is that kimchi, Bears? Kimchi is probiotic. Other things, some fermented food is actually good. You can actually make some of these yourself at home. We have actually made some just using regular vegetables and just put it in the refrigerator. So these are things that can actually replenish your gut bacteria. All right. I'm going to end here, but the reason, and I'm going to go to Revelation, and I want you to go there with me. Revelation. So what's the reason why we as Seventh-day Adventists are going to be so interested in this? Revelation 14, please. Why are we so interested in that? Or our microbiota, right? Our microbiome, but more importantly, our brains are working effectively. So Revelation 14, all right? Verse 1. It says, "Then I looked, and behold, a Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, and having his Father's name written on their foreheads." So where is our frontal lobe located again? Right here, all right? So, so the people of God that the Father is coming for is actually have clear frontal lobes. Can you also go to Revelation 7, verse 3? Then saying, "Do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of God on their foreheads." Again, that is saying to me that the people of God have clear frontal lobes. All right? You can hear God speaking to you. You can then have the correct judgment. You can make the right choices. And the last but not least was Revelation 22:4. And this should actually be sobering for us. "They shall see his face, and his name shall be on their foreheads." Brothers, I share because this is actually a journey for me as well. And as I learn, I try to apply in my own life. And I hope from what we have actually, I've shared here today, right? Every single one of us inside here, unless we're wasting our time, wants to be spending eternity with Christ. We are on the threshold of that time. It is more than ever that we need to have clear minds. And part of the reason that we're going to have clear minds, right, we need to actually have clear bodies as well. Bodies that are clean, making sure that we're eating properly, making sure that we're exercising, we're drinking the water that we should. It's health reform in its greatest sense. It's not just talking about food, but health reform, right? And I've said this before to different audiences. You can accept the gospel today as a Baptist, and you'll be fine. You'll die, probably, and you will naturally hear the trumpet when it sounds, and you'll rise. But the Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist, was never meant to be for the people who died and are resurrected. They are the people who are supposed to be translated. Part of the reason for that is because of the health message those are the people that should see Christ coming. Our health message puts us in that position to actually see Christ coming. Hope that you will join me. Trying to close. Sister Mary, you want to pray for us? Any questions? Sorry. Okay. Let's get to the questions first, and then we can close. Any questions, please? Now, this is an exhaustive study, so I've kind of just touched the surface for you here today. There's just so much.
So are we supposed to eat these fermented foods then? Because I thought they were supposed to be bad for you. Like this is it kefir or all those kind of foods? I thought they were bad for you.
Yeah, I think it depends on how it is prepared. And I think there is now some growing areas in terms of looking at how that is prepared. But prepared the right way, it can actually help rather than be bad for you. So the idea, yes. Yes.
Yeah, if you do that, then that's what's going to be causing the irritation on the stomach. But the ones that we do, you don't use vinegar. You just leave it to ferment naturally, and we have bacteria in the environment. So as you leave it and as you stir it and as you shake it, just leaving it over time, eventually then the good bacteria will grow in what your vegetables that you're fermenting. And in that way, you're generating the good bacteria to help with your gut flora. But if you're using vinegar in any of a fermentation process, that's where the damage will be caused because vinegar is an irritant. Yeah.
And how about taking pro and prebiotics?
Right. Yeah, we can actually do that, and you can get those from your regular health stores, I believe, as well. But it is always going to be better if we actually have those naturally, and we do have them in the food that we eat, right? So as I said, your vegetables, your fruits, your nuts, and like, especially things that are high in fiber, actually helps the microbiome to grow. It can be sufficient, yes. Yes, it's always going to be better than actually any form of supplements that you have. But as I said, if we are worried about what we are actually having, then have the supplements in order to assist us in that regard. Better than not having anything at all, right? It's always going to be better.
I have one or two.
One or two.
The first one is regarding the consumption of fish, because you mentioned that there is higher concentrations of mercury there.
Right.
So what's your general advice in that regard? Should we actually cut down fish altogether? Because mercury, obviously, is not good to our health. The second one...
Can I answer the first one first?
Yeah, sure.
Right. We might actually forget the one we do. All right, so the whole idea is that God's people ultimately are supposed to be moving to be not having meat any at all. If we are having anything that is an animal product, and which also includes fish, right? Anything that actually has a liver produces cholesterol. I don't know if we knew that.
You may need to repeat that.
All right, let me repeat that. Anything that has a liver produces cholesterol. We produce the cholesterol that we actually need. Why many of us end up with increased cholesterol levels is because we consume animal products. That's not just meat, but also naturally things like your milk and the other things as well. Anything that comes from animals, right? So my thing is that as a people of God, we are really supposed to be moving to a meat-free diet, right? And of course, that will cut down on all of the other issues that we have with the physical illnesses as well, but also the mental illnesses that we're going to face, right? But the fish nowadays, because of the pollution of the waterways, we know that those are increased levels of mercury. And as a matter of fact, I saw a report coming out just this week. I was talking about actually having too much tuna, or having tuna, because they're saying that tunas now are actually have very high mercury levels. So my thing is that I just avoid it, right? I leave anything that is questionable, that is out of my diet. And there's enough things that are there now in order to actually ensure that we can eat healthy, you know, and maintain clarity of both mind and body.
But it's not just the mercury.
Right.
It's also the other pollutants.
Yes.
Because the water that they
Right.
and as they and you're stressing your liver.
Right, you had two questions. Yes, second question. Sorry.
My second one
Yes.
is actually, it may be a follow-up on what you have said. Now, if we look at vegetables, we know that there's a lot of pesticides and chemicals that go into our farms,
Yeah.
loads and loads of them. So with the biodiversity principle that we just mentioned now,
Right.
obviously those who end up in our vegetables and on our vegetable tables. So at the end of the day, we are still getting the same carcinogenic elements that we are trying to run away from. So with that in mind, what's your advice on that?
Grow your own.
Sorry?
Grow your own.
Grow your own.
And basically that's what ultimately I believe that we are supposed to be doing as a people anyway. We are supposed to be actually producing our own things, right? We currently, for the past few years, we have had a little garden in the back of our, we know that probably doesn't produce everything, right? But as organic as you can get the things, and that's questionable when you're going to your regular supermarket at the same time. But the Lord will actually help us if we are actually willing to follow Him in that way, all right? But I believe that ultimately we need to move to a point where we're actually producing and we're not actually depending on the world. And there's going to be a time that we won't be able to get it anyway.
Sufficiently.
It's more expensive for at the end of it though, when you get ill. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, how you know you're getting the food out.
Yes.
I think the Lambani was asking the question because I looked at the report done by, well, they were investigating Monsanto.
Right.
and another organization.
Food giant.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much stuff that we consume. And I know the sister talk about peeling and washing and stuff. These stuff go through the food that we consume. And I know we in church speak very little about growing your own stuff. We come and we tell the church about eating healthily and all that stuff.
Right.
But we spend very little time in talking about the organic stuff and growing your own and how to do it, because we are consuming tons of chemicals. It's like we can't get away from it. And also, one scientific study normally comes out 1 week, and the next week they come up with another thing. Then this week they talk about coffee. It's no more bad for you. It's no good for you.
Right.
And then they were saying about the fast food, the processed stuff. It's actually the nitrates in the food itself. Because all these sort of things that comes out, because somebody goes a bit further into why are these bad for you, and they did the
or it
program
might
and
depend on the persons who sponsor those.
well,
type
yeah,
of
so
research.
it's a confusing area in which we live in. That's why we should spend more time in talking about growing your own.
Yeah.
Because people think that, we can walk into Sainsbury's and once we wash the stuff, it's fine. But it is laced with stuff. And certain diets are not good for certain people. So it's best to also find out what diet suits you. Because we might be deficient in one thing, and we don't talk about that. We just say, okay, go in and buy this and produce and eat that. But then your doctor would tell you, no, don't eat that. That is not good for you. This is not good.
But one other thing is that if we're going to also be taking advice from the world, the whole idea is that I believe that a lot of the advice that we have now, a lot of the information has been there in Spirit of Prophecies for over 100 years. The fact of the matter is that we are the ones not actually availing ourselves of that. All right? So when I go back and I look at some of these things, and I'm just saying that this is not new. All right? But if we look in the world today, and this is probably a time where we need to start looking at, as I said, how do we come together as a people and start producing our own? The vegan revolution is very much present, right? So in other words, the world has accepted that eating a particular way, eating fruits and vegetables and nuts and those things are actually best. We are the ones who are still grappling with that in the church, unfortunately, right? So my thing is that we need to come together. And when we actually come together, I believe the Father will bless us abundantly. So whatever little plots of land we have, what they call them? The allotments, right? We need to start getting together. How do we then grow all of that? Don't have to grow everything. Some person can grow this particular thing, then you go, and we then share among each other. Ultimately, that's where we're going to actually have to go. As I said, and I talk to the son all the time, I worry about some of the things that we actually get from the supermarket, even the things that are labeled organic. But I think that is instructive for us at this point in time that we need to start doing something for ourselves. And not just the allotments, we also need to looking at businesses for ourselves as well, right? Whether it's education, whether it is food. And Sister White actually counsels us. Restaurants, sanitariums, and other, but also schools, right? All of those things are what the things that we really should be looking at putting in place for ourselves at this point in time. Because I think very soon we won't be able to get that from the world.
And why do you think growing in an allotment is better than growing in a large field?
Why
do you think growing in an allotment is better?
I'm not saying that it's better. I'm just saying that use what you have.
Yeah.
Right. Use what you have.
Because you beating the drum for organic. We can't go organic.
Who can go back?
Everyone. A few people can. But unless the majority keeps the pests, the disease, and everything like that under control, you won't get a crop.
Okay. All right. That's
In this
a
polluted
very
world, you
pessimistic
cannot
view.
grow organic unless the majority of people are trying to keep the pests and diseases that this world is rife with under control. So, I mean, if you want to go organic, you'll have half the world dead inside a year.
Okay. Probably agree to disagree, but I'm not quite sure what that means.
Well, I can tell you, we've tried growing organic, trying to grow some organic potatoes. The blight got them before the potatoes are the size of marbles.
Okay.
I mean, if everything, the ones that grow organic can only do it because the neighbours are keeping the pests and diseases.
Pesticides. Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's a lovely idea, and before the world became as polluted as it is, you could have done.
Right.
But
Right.
I'm afraid
But-
these days you can't.
But that's where we need to also be up on the science as well, because there are different ways of actually producing crops these days, right? And as I said, organically, without even putting them in the soil. So we need to actually be moving with the times as well and looking at the science behind all of this, so that we can actually help ourselves. I will never be a point where I kind of throw my hands up in futility and say, that's it, right? We need to actually continue to move forward. And I believe if enough of us are actually interested in that type of way, the Lord will actually help us, right? We need to be persons united, right, and moving, right? We want to do what is best for us, what He desires for us as is best, and I believe that He will help us. His power will pour out. I mean, greater is He that is in me than he is that is in the world. Positive note we're ending on? Yes, Sister.
I was going to say that I worked in a church once where we did try.
Yes.
We did actually get an allotment, 2 allotments, and we did that so that we could encourage the church members to come and to learn how to grow. And we also did it as an outreach to the community.
To the community, right.
And the person who was running it was so enthusiastic, put so much into it, but we couldn't get anyone from the church interested.
I know.
We
that's the
got some interest
unfortunate.
from people outside, but not inside.
That's the unfortunate thing.
And
Right.
the truth is, we are still struggling ourselves
Yeah.
to come to terms
Yeah.
with all of this. I mean, you're talking about not eating between meals, and I'm a snacker, so it's hard. It's hard, but listening to what you're saying is making me think I've got to do something about it. But
Indeed.
yes, the world is moving forward in this area, and
Yes.
we are still struggling.
Yeah, indeed.
Still struggling.
And my thing is just, are we going to be trusting and obeying? Let's trust and obey, right? Move with the light that has been given you. And I think that's just it. That's what the Father is waiting on for us as well, that we move with the light that has been given to us. Right? And I think once we do that, then I believe that we'll be fine. He will help us along the way. He will strengthen us, and He will make those doors open that we see and we consider shut at this point in time. Right? But it depends largely on us choosing His way than actually just saying that, it's fine, we'll just continue to do as live in this world as it is, right? So, on a positive note, so the Father does want us, I believe, to grow and be in good health, to prosper and be in good health, right? And I believe that He's making those provisions available. A lot of it is coming through the research that are coming out at this point in time as well. And as we find out about those, we're sharing, and hopefully as we share as well, persons will take those on board and move and apply in their own lives. Good. So we're going away and we're going to be doing better, right? So there's a commitment that all of you who have been shared light today are going to go and see how best we can actually tweak some things in our own lives, right? And I think that's what it's all about, really, right? That we just do a little bit in our little areas, right? Yeah, baby steps, right? So we might not go all the way in the allotments currently, but we can start in our backyards with our little pots, right? And we can grow things there as well. We got corn last year. We actually got some potatoes as well. We got a whole lot of tomatoes, right? So pumpkin, yes, right? Just a little background, right? And you can share with the brethren as well in the community. All right. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Good. Thank you. All right, Sister Mary, you want to pray for?